Shalom to all my friends out there in video land. It is I, your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, delighted that you are joining us here at PJTC to count the Omer. This is our video hangout for day number 23 of the Omer, and today I'm going to tell you my favorite Netzach story. If you remember, the midah or attribute of Netzach means endurance, patience, victory through long suffering, let's say. In Hebrew, generally, it has the meaning of eternity, but one can look at that eternity as that which is endured or that which endures or triumphs. Because at the end of the day, nothing lasts longer than eternity, and end of several days, perhaps. And my favorite story about this attribute is the entire Sefer Bemidbar, the entire book of Numbers. Because every year when we get to the book of Numbers, it strikes me that this is a profound meditation on resilience and endurance, and perhaps even persevering through a trying time, not for your own benefit at the end, but for the benefit of the people who come after you. Among the many different stories within Sefer Bemidbar, there's a couple that jump out at me as profound lessons on Netzach, or patience. The first is the story of the spies, or the scouts. Our people have been marching across the wilderness ever since they left Egypt all the way up to the banks of the River Jordan, and now it's time to cross into the Promised Land. But first, God asks them to send scouts. They pick one person from each of the tribes, that's 12 people altogether, and they go and scout out the land. And when they come back, they say, we have good news and we have bad news. The good news is the fruit there is giant. The bad news is, you know who eats giant fruit? Giants do. And most of the scouts say, let's just camp out over here and maybe this will be the promised land now. But two of the scouts hold out and they say, no, we've been marching across the desert this whole time to get to this place. We're scared too, but we're not going to turn back now. We want to persevere and go to the land that God has promised to us. So they took a vote and the faithful scouts lost. To which God says, and I'm paraphrasing here, whether you think you can conquer the land or you think you can't, guess what? You're right. And because you've elected not to trust in my promise, your punishment, as it were, is that you shall never enter that land. You get to keep marching, and once everybody who was an adult when they left Egypt dies, then their successors, the next generation, the people who were born in the wilderness or who were just children when you left Egypt, those folks can cross over. So you just bought yourselves about another 40 years in the wilderness. And some folks were like, just kidding, let's go take it. And God's like, no, don't try it now. But they do, and they get schmeiced, and everybody else is left with the decision. Do we stay in the wilderness and stay faithful to this commitment until this entire generation has died out so that our children could go in, or do we just give up? That's sort of behind the scenes. That's never talked about in the text. They could have just stopped being Jewish at that point. For most of the folks there, it was of no benefit to them immediately to continue this journey. The best decision they could have made was to ignore the scouts and say, okay, let's go do this. The second best decision they made, or maybe the best decision they could make after they messed it up the first time, was to say, okay, let's keep walking. And because they did, because they endured, because they committed to the journey, even when they couldn't benefit, their children got to enter the promised land. And if a 40-year journey for no personal benefit doesn't exemplify endurance and resilience and commitment and triumph, I don't know what does. And before I let you go, there's one more story in Sefer Bemidbar that echoes this, or that rhymes with this decision. There's a point at which Moses disobeys God and has a consequence that I think is one of the most tragic stories in all of the Torah. The people are griping because there's no water. Moses goes to talk to God. God says, okay, go speak to the rock and water will flow out of it. But Moses is so frustrated with the people's griping that he takes his stick and he whacks the rock and the water flows out and everybody drinks and they think, okay, cool, we have water now. What they don't know is that Moses did not follow God's instruction, and God says, look, I needed you to be patient in this moment. I needed you not to lose your temper. And if I say speak to the rock and you hit the rock, that can't go without consequence. And so the consequence, Moses, is that you don't get to go into the promised land. Before then, you could say that Moses and Joshua and Caleb, the two other faithful spies, could have gone where the others couldn't have. But because of this decision, because Moses lost his patience, God decreed that he could not lead them into the promised land. At which point, The decision that Moses could have made was to say, fine, I've been leading this people all this time, and this is the thanks I get. Peace. And he could have walked away from the whole project. Instead, he endures with them throughout their journey. He gets right up to the edge of the promised land. He looks over the river into what could have been his, but never will be. And then he gives them a speech, and the speech is the entire book of Deuteronomy. And then he says, this is yours now. I'm going to go, but not before he's done leading them all the way up to the edge of the river. And then God's self, buries Moses with honor. And if following God and following Moses for 40 years with no personal reward is an example of Netzach, I think all the more so leading this difficult people all the way up to the edge of the land, knowing that you could never go with them, that's some Netzach right there. Friends, thank you for listening to me tell you my favorite story about Netzach. You can hear it again when we get to Sefer Bemidbar or the Book of Numbers. In the meantime, I'd love to hear your favorite Netzach story, whether it's from our tradition or another story you've heard, that's fine. Put it in the Facebook comments, the YouTube comments, send me an email. I do read those. Write it down in your journal. I've heard from somebody who has really appreciated doing journaling this time, even though she wanted to keep it to herself. It's still been very valuable for her. And don't forget to count day 23 of the Omer tonight after sundown. Until next time, friends, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, peace.